Hey folks, it's George Leoniak and welcome to New Geometry. I'm excited to be back for a video. It's been, I don't know, maybe 9 months or so. I have lots to share here for some new and exciting geometry that I've been working on. We're going to dive into exploring the fourth dimension forms today. I just completed a master class with advanced apprentices that drew the fourth dimensional form. So I'm going to overview some of that work. That course is available now at New Geometry Courses. So check that out if you want to dive into this material after you see this. And also I have some new material on the fourth dimension that I'm excited to share here as well. So this is going to be jam-packed with mind-expanding geometry. So there will be plenty of images in this presentation that I haven't seen anywhere else, and some are going to make some of those complex geometric designs apparent to where all the different polyhedra are in these multidimensional drawings that we see. So I'm excited to share all that with you. In addition, I also have a apprenticeship coming up, so check that out on the New Geometry site. I'm going to share the screen right now, and we'll dive into just a kind of quick overview of the fourth dimension forms to kind of get on the same page and familiar with the terminology a little bit and what we're talking about with the fourth dimension forms. Now, I don't have any slides really in here to show the third dimension forms that we're mostly familiar with, the platonic solids. But there are examples of those platonic solids because the fourth dimension forms are, let's just say, kind of cells or clusters of platonic solids. We're going to be dealing with the 6 regular fourth dimension forms, and I'm going to overview those here. So these are drawings that we did in the master class, and you'll see that we start off relatively simple with the 5 cell here and work our way all the way up to the 120 cell, which you'll see examples of here in a moment. So the 5 cell, so it's consisting of 5 tetrahedral cells, and the easiest representation of that is really this pentagon here, which can break out each of the tetrahedral shapes, the tetrahedron, the 5 of them, and there are of course a few different views and a few different ways to look at this. So this is kind of the fun of looking at these diagrams from this perspective of how are these other tetrahedral shapes that we're used to seeing as maybe a regular equilateral triangle, looking from these different angles embedded in these designs. And these designs, drawings are going to get more complex, but the beauty of it is that we can use our hand-drawn sacred geometry techniques to draw them. And that's, of course, what New Geometry teaches. So here's the 16 cell, which is 16 tetrahedral cells. And each of these are analogous to a third dimensional form, meaning it's kind of like a higher dimensional representation of the tetrahedron. For instance, would be the 5 cell. A 16 cell is analogous to the octahedron, but the breakdown of the cells within that, these drawings here, are going to be different examples of tetrahedra like this. Now, probably the most familiar or most recognizable in terms of the name, at least, the tesseract, is the 8 cell, and that has 8 cubic cells. And there's, like I said, most people know this one in sacred geometry circles or have heard of it in a relationship to the cube within inside a cube, and then you can divide the spaces up into the remaining 6 cubic cells to get 8 cubic cells. Well, there are other drawings of that. The usual one we see is maybe in the Metatron's cube drawing where we have two cubes, a cube and a cube inside in the hexagon. But we have this more, another example of it here is in this octagon shape, and you get essentially 8 cubic cells that look like this from the octagon. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of the different shapes that are in these. And like I said, we're going to get more complex as we go on. There's, besides the platonic solids, which there are 5 of those in third dimension, there is a polytope, or another form here in the fourth dimension called the 24 cell, which is 24 octahedron cells. And it doesn't have a third dimension platonic solid that it's analogous to, but it's analogous to the cube octahedron or rhombic dodecahedron, which those two shapes are related to the cube and the octahedron. This shape is regular, which means it has all equal edge lengths in the fourth dimension, and angles meet at the same angle, and you're dealing with all the same shape, which is these triangles making these octahedral cells. So we have a couple of different ways to draw this. This was the first way that I taught the apprentices in that group in the master class, which was in this one, which kind of has the 24 the dodecagon pattern here, which gives us some pretty interesting looking octahedra. And then this, one of the last drawings we did here, and we're going to get into this drawing a little bit more later on, so I'm going to save a little bit about what all the other information is within that circle template there. But this is another drawing of the 24 cell. It actually is a little bit more like it would be in motion. If you go to any of these Wikipedia pages after this presentation and look up the 24 cell, you'll see some animations in there, which are going to be kind of showing a rotation of the form. This kind of looks a little bit more like that, where this type of diagram is just trying to show you all the tetrahedral cells in a regular array to look at the different types of octahedra in there. Well, we also have octahedra that can be found within this shape here, and I've broken out 4 of these on the sides. These are going to repeat in groups of 8 for this pattern. So we'll get, not a group of 8, a group of 6 for this pattern, groups of 6. So that will add up to 6 of each of these to get our 24. So we'll come back to that one in a little bit. So the 600 cell here, now this one is using the golden ratio. Up until this point, none of the previous forms, other than the pentagon one, which we had for the 5 cell representation, had golden ratio, because of course it's in a pentagon. But this one here is analogous to the icosahedron, which of course is the golden ratio, one of the golden ratio platonic solids, which has the 20 triangle faces. But this is the analogous form to it, and you think it would be composed of icosahedral cells, but this is actually internally composed of 600 tetrahedral cells. So you have various shapes of tetrahedra here. What I tried to do with this diagram here was to show the group how, and this is really like a 3rd dimensional build. I'll show you a Zoom tool model of this in just a moment, of how we can build this structure. There's another drawing of this, which we're going to dig into a lot more of the 600 cell in just a moment, that is going to actually show you all 600 cells. So when you look at this, you're like, well, how could there be 600 tetrahedra in this? Well, there's not 600 tetrahedra in this drawing. It's more a 3rd dimensional representation of it that is related to a lot of platonic structures that we're familiar with. Like here we have the icosahedron, and within this, we have some examples of tetrahedra. At that stage, you'll actually get 20 tetrahedra. And then we're going to kind of do a little stellation on that tetrahedron, and we'll get 3 more, and then we build a dodecahedron around that, and we get more tetrahedra, and we rhombic triconahedron, icosydodecahedron. We keep adding layers to it as we build out until we get 270 tetrahedra within that structure, which I'll show you in just a moment. But we drew this form, this kind of three-dimensional representation of it from the three different orthographic perspectives, the twofold, the fivefold, and the threefold. And, in these, showing different examples of how the tetrahedra are showing up at the different levels. It's a little more complicated to see in 2D because you have edges sharing edges that are below the same line. So you're looking at one line that it represents a number of edges. But when you do build it with the 3D model like this to create those 270 tetrahedral cells, you start off by building that icosahedron at the center, and you're adding the successive layers. You can see that there's pentagon and triangle here, so that's your icosydodecahedron. You got a vertex in the middle of that. But what I was doing here was, I was showing each of the tetrahedral cells that are represented here as we're building our way out. There's also like a flat triangle, which is representative of a tetrahedral cell in this as well. So kind of neat to see the way the edges of a larger form are going to integrate with the edge and vertices of a smaller form inside it to create these various tetrahedron within there. Another form we did was the last one of the 6 4D forms here was the 120 cell. And that is analogous to the dodecahedron, and it actually is composed of dodecahedra, 120 of those dodecahedra. And these 3 drawings here are another example of a kind of 3-dimensional model that is representative of this 4th dimensional object. So you're not going to see the 120 dodecahedron. Obviously, when you're looking down at this shape here, you're not going to see 120, be able to actually count the 120 dodecahedra here, but you will see, some very cool representations of dodecahedra. So these are really pretty interesting to study up close, and doing the hand-drawn drawings and taking some tracing paper or something and over top of them and trying to locate the points to come up with some of these other dodecahedra. I mean, literally I was finding dodecahedra in these right up to maybe a few minutes before class when I was about to teach the drawing. I think I got the representation ones here, but you never know. There could be other ones that are hidden within here. So we did, these are, 3 examples of the drawings there. Okay, so, but that was, other than this other drawing that we also did, those were kind of the main representation of the class that is really awesome to kind of get that full exposure in doing all the hand-drawn geometry. And in the last, second to last session or something like that, I was talking about these 2 representations of the 600 cell and the 120 cell, because these are done in a tricontagon, which is 30-point polygon here, 30 edges. It's got 30 points around here. And, I'd seen these a while ago, and I just didn't think I was going to figure out how to pick up the internal points, like what was the method that I would use using the sacred geometry techniques that could be, done with the compass and straight edge to accurately do this. So, I gave myself a little bit of challenge within the last 2 weeks ago, pretty much, to figure out how to draw, or, try and figure out how to draw these from this perspective, because when you look at this will contain all 120 points of this vertices, all 600 vertices of the 120 cell. And you'll actually have all the intersections of all the tetrahedral cells. There's 600 tetrahedral cells in this, and 120 dodecahedral cells in that. Well, I think it's a lot easier to look at these drawings because, I could start to make out dodecahedra in this. But finding dodecahedra in here, this was really fun and really interesting. So this is, where I kind of left off with the master class, and I'll probably do some future classes to do some drawings like this. But I guess the point is could I figure out how to actually draw them? And yes, I could. Here are the two drawings that was able to construct using the compass and straightedge. Of course, I utilized the iPad to help ease the process of figuring out to make sure I was doing it accurately. And it's amazing, as you'll see in the next sequence of drawings that we get into here, that it all works out in terms of the dual relationships between these, how the two forms kind of compound and how the vertices match up. I mean, it's spectacular. So I'm super excited to continue to share this. And this is really within the last week and a half or so that kind of had a epiphany about how the 4D forms relate to one another. Up until that point, I was really looking at each one kind of more individually, and these next series of slides will be getting more into the relationships between them, the forms. So here's that, 120 cell. This took me probably 8 hours to do by hand. You have a quite extensive setup, and then of the lines in the circle pattern, and just doing some setup lines, and then finding all the vertices as we work our way around. And there's no doubt, no hiding that I made a number of line mistakes in my drawing, which I had to kind of white out as I go. But it's super exciting to do, and I would like to try and teach this to a group someday. I think it would probably take maybe 6 or 8 sessions with homework behind, in between, to do some of the completion work on the lines. But I think it's definitely possible for anybody who's really interested in. Let me know. But really the question is like, it's a pretty cool looking these are cool patterns to look at. But the question was for me, what is it really showing me, and like, because, first glance, and I had looked at this before and never really tried to identify where the different dodecahedra are. So I guess I just wasn't ready for it at the time because I was doing so much of the 3D geometry just to draw a regular dodecahedron on 2D that represented the third dimension dodecahedra. So here are some examples of the 4D dodecahedra of how they kind of, squish into this space. And of course, we get a variety of different sizes and shapes, just like we did in the other one. But here, we basically work our way around kind of at 4 different levels within here. So here's the kind of one on the outside, and then we got the next one in, which is this one. Then this one gets a little more into the interior, and then this one is kind of right into the interior here. I got a better drawing of this, or take away the black line so you could see the blue lines in there a little bit further on in the presentation here, because I know it's hard to make out with the other sequence of lines in there. But the point is that, there's 30 of each of these, right? So if you whirl them all around like that, this would be representative of all those dodecahedra within there to count them up to the 120 for the complete rosette. Now, this is not still what it looks like kind of in the 4th dimensional space, but this is really stretching one's perceptive ability and pattern recognition skills to be able to observe and find information in a complex array of patterns like this. So it's super exciting to do. Like, I've just been going more and more into the 4th dimensional forms, looking for shapes beyond what I'm showing you in this presentation, because it's just super interesting. So here are the 600, here's a 600 cell, and don't mind the other, there's a lot more dots in here right now. I'll explain what those black dots that don't have any lines are in just a moment. But this is an example of the 600 cell. It just has 120 vertices, remember. So it has those four rings of 30 vertices each. And the composition of the tetrahedra in here, which of course, next slide or a couple down here, I'll show without all the other stuff going on. But the tetrahedra here are all around here in whorls. And essentially what you have here is that you have different examples of the tetrahedra that go all the way around. You have four that are kind of this style, and then you have these, which are kind of alternate. So you have kind of two representative of this, two representative of this, two representative of this, but there's only one of these. Like there's 30 of these, 30 of these, 30 of these, and 30 of these. And then there's 60 of each of these other ones, right? So when you add all that up, if there's 60 of each of these and 60 of each of these, so there's 8 of that type of 8 times 60, and then you have the 4 times 30, which should add up to 600. I can't do the math in my head real quick, but it all adds up to 600. So anyway, there's all those tetrahedra and the different examples that are in here. Here's the slide I was talking about that kind of removes the some of the other information. Now, we still have a lot of dots on this page, but at least it takes out the other lines to, just see the dodecahedra of how they're connecting the dots. In this one, they're connected to black dots. And for these, they're connected to the gold dots for the tetrahedra. Now, why are there so many dots in here? Because remember, the 600 cell is only supposed to have 120, and this one's supposed to only, it has 600 vertices in this one, right? So these are dual forms. You could see that the relationship of the numbers are going back and forth between 600 and 120. So as I was exploring this, I wanted to understand how these dual forms connect, and how does one kind of relate and kind of connect and nest in the other in a way. And the cool thing here is, in order to transpose the dots from the 120 cell, remember there's 600 of these, into the 120 cell over here, the 600 cell over here, what you have to do is go to the center of each of the tetrahedra in here. So remember, there's 600 tetrahedra around this. And you have to find the center point of each of those tetrahedra. And when you find the center, each center point in each of the tetrahedra is a vertex of the 120 cell, which are those 600 vertices, which will now be spread out. So there's 600 tetrahedra in this one, right? That's the 600 cell, 600 tetrahedra there. At the center of each of those is one vertex of the 600 vertices of the 120 cell. I know it's a little confusing to get the numbers down. And then for this one over here, we got the dodecahedron. Remember, there's 120 of those. So at the center of each of these, there's a white dot. I think I placed a white dot there, a white dot there, a white dot there. You spin that all around for 120. And those are the vertices of the 600 cell. So now you could basically draw all these 600 tetrahedra into this one, and I could, if I wanted to, draw all these dodecahedra into this one, right? So that's how they kind of relate. Now, here's a little more simple way to look at this and not taking on the big ones like I did first, because I want to be like, wow, is this really true? Because like I never knew that for like these simple forms, well, not simple, but the more simple than the 600 vertice one, right? So let's just go back to the octahedron cube compound, right? It's kind of like the cube and the octahedron. Those in third dimension, they're dual forms, right? And they're easy to remember because the octahedron, remember, I got a little one around here somewhere. It's a platonic solid, which I usually have here. But here's a cube, and well, been a while since I've done a video, so I don't have an octahedron laying around here. Just anyway, so I'll just keep going. But the octahedron has 6 vertices. The cube has six faces. So there's a relationship between the vertices of the octahedron and the cube faces. And then, reverse that, you have 8 vertices of the cube and the 8 faces of the octahedron. So this is kind of similar in a sense, but the difference is here is that on those, we're kind of going face the vertice, right? And here, for the 4th dimension, we're going to vertex to the center of a cell. And that was really cool because, so this example here that I'm showing is the 16 cell, which is the blue one. At each of the 16 tetrahedral cells, which a tetrahedral cell here is this 3 sides of the octagon with the line across it with 2 crisscrossing lines. So this point right here is the center of that, and that is one of the one vertex of the octahedron, not octahedron, of the tesseract, the 8 cell below it, inside it, right? So of course you have 8 of those, and then you have another 8 because you have 16 cells. So those are the 16 locations that will have a vertex of the 8 cell. And then we reverse that here, and 8 cell only has 8 cells. So at the center of 8 of those cubes, we'll go back and we'll get the 16 cell, because the 16 cell, even though it has 16 cells, it only has 8 vertices. So, it's a lot of numbers to throw back and forth of which one's in which, but I think if you just wrote it out or drew it, I think if you draw it, if you drew this, you'd really get it. And that's the point, because it's kind of like having a journal or something like that. When you've got so many things that, you want to kind of work out and you journal about it. Well, and then it helps kind of organize things in a way. It helps you understand a little more. Well, that's drawing sacred geometry is like having that journal to kind of look back at and kind of see connections. So, my drawings are this kind of long continuum of relationships that are telling a story that is continuing to unfold and get deeper and deeper into it as time goes on. But you have that collection of drawings that you're building your knowledge off of. And my YouTube videos are kind of, I think there's maybe 140 on here now. I'm not sure. They're kind of a testament to that process from where I started in the first videos of sharing this, of how my knowledge base has grown as my library of drawings has gotten larger and the relationships between them. And, that's check out all the other videos and you'll see how the progression has been. So here is the 4D forms, more dual 4D forms of the same tesseract and the 8 cell and 16 cell relationship. Now they look really different here, right? So this is kind of the top-down version of it with the most symmetrical way, I guess, to look at these within these octagons is the 16 cell and the 8 cell. But here is also an 8 cell and a 16 cell. So in this example here, this is the 8 cell. In this image, Coxeter's book, Regular Polytopes, he has these 2 cubes laid out, and the blue and the red one. It kind of helped point me in the right direction of how to look at some of these things. But you can, of course, make a tesseract out of 2 cubes by just connecting the vertices between them, because remember, it has 16 vertices. So this blue cube has 8 vertices that it's contributing. When you connect it to the one below it, which also has 8, those are the vertices, 16 in total. And then we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 8 edges there that are going to connect between those vertices, in addition to the 12 edges of each cube, which gives us the total of the 32 edges in the form. So, but anyway, so here's just another example. So these are a little harder to see, these kind of cubes that are generated in this tesseract on the side. But at the center of each of these cubes that are created between the two cubes, so from two cubes, you get 6 more basically. These are where the vertices show up. And then, of course, you have the one centered in each of those. Now, we can reverse that whole thing and show the 16 tetrahedra. Remember the 16 cells, 16 tetrahedra. So at the center of each of these, which is definitely a little harder to see where each of those tetrahedra are, but I worked through the drawing, and of course it took out all the lines to help do that. But you could see that that same tesseract, this big one here, is nested within that one. So it's that center to center connection in the fourth dimension that is really interesting, rather than the face to vertex connection that is the way it is in the third dimension, or either edges crossing to kind of create compounds. We'll talk about the compounds in a little further on here. I also am going to show you what the 16 tetrahedra look like when I break this diagram apart here just a little bit. But you may be like, well, where did these drawings come from, right? Like, I haven't shown these examples of these two, this tesseract or this octahedron came from. Well, the octahedron, the 16 cells, see, it looks like an octahedron, and from that view, with 2 points on the inside. Well, this came from this drawing, which is also in Coxeter's regular polytope book here, that was a great study. This is the kind of last complex drawing we did in the class. And we're going to talk a bit about this one quite a bit now, because it is going to really start to show us how the different forms are nested within inside one another. So this is the 24 cell. I showed it earlier on. I said we talk about it later on, and now we're going to dig into it more, because this is the one that is the analogous form, is not one of the platonic solids. It's kind of in between a rhombic dodecahedron and a cube octahedron. So you got all your vertices here, 24 of them. It creates 24 octahedral cells, but it also has 24 cubic cells in it too. So has both of those. Oh, here's the 16 tetrahedra from breaking down that shape that I showed you previously of the 16 cells. So, I tried to show where each of them are. So essentially, look at it. Easy way to look at this really is visualize this as an octahedron, which, geez, I don't know where one is around here, because I love to just hold it up so I could show you one. I have a little one here. Okay, this will work. So here's this little octahedron, right? So you have 8 faces. So and you have 6 vertices. Now, picture this: if you have 2 additional vertices at the inside of this, right? And then you go from each face. So each face, you're going to send a point from from this triangle to each of the 2 points that are into this. So then I'll create a tetrahedron, right? If I put a point inside this and connect from the triangle to that point inside, that's a tetrahedron. But if you have 2 points in there, then you'll create 2 tetrahedra on every face, right, of this octahedron. So there's 8 faces, and there's 2 points inside. So I'm getting 2 tetrahedra basically every single time. And that's essentially what I did here. So, from this triangle here, I created a tetrahedron to that point and a tetrahedron to that point. And I did it from every face of the larger octahedron. And when you do that, you come up with all the tetrahedra just like that from this particular view, right? And that's what's so cool about the fourth dimension views, is like when you rotate it to another view, it looks totally different. I mean, you can kind of see more similarities in the third dimension, but when you rotate a form, but when you rotate in the fourth dimension, you're like dealing with a whole nother shape. And this will become apparent in just a little bit with another example of the 24 cell. So let's see where I was going with that. Yeah, so the next thing I want to get into is the 4D forms that are going to be sharing the vertices, which I guess is how they're really creating compounds between the forms. Now, a lot of compounds in the third dimension, they cross their edges and create larger forms. I was trying to understand before this video what is compounds in the fourth dimension, and what it came up with is kind of what I'm going to share with you in this next series of slides, because in this here, you have 3 8 cells and 3 16 cells in each 24 cell. Okay, so this is the complete 24 cell pattern right here from this angle of it. And within this, so here's that blue cube, and there's that red cube, and this whole shape is right in there, right? Now, this yellow edge here and this edge here, those are the edges of the hexagon, right? So if I ratchet this around over to this edge and this edge of the hexagon, I'll be able to create a whole nother 8-cell tesseract there. And if I just go one more click over to this edge and this edge, I get another. So there are the three tesseract, the 3 8-cell in there. Now, if I do the same thing with the vertex to vertex on the hexagon, on this hexagon, and I rotate the this octahedron shape, the 16 cell, and line it up on these vertices, I get another 16 cell, and I spin it around one more time to these, and I get those. So I got 3 of those in there as well. And in fact, I color-coded these dots to show that. So if you pause the video for a moment and look at the red, blue, and the yellow dots, which the black one's on, those are going to correspond to all the vertices are being provided from those compound of these 3 16 cells. Now, the tesseract is interesting because it is a compound of 2 16 cells, right? So here's this tesseract shape, which is just the light gray lines. And here's a tesseract over here, and the light gray lines. And here's the form of the 16 cell. The tesseract is at the same angle here. You can see the vertices are in the same spot. So the yellow gold one at the top, gold one, blue, 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 blue across there. But see, the 16 cell is now on the gold vertices, and then the 16 cell is on the blue vertices. But that doesn't mean in the 24 cell, all of a sudden now we have 6 of these. No, because it's just, remember, when you go back to the 24 cell, which all these forms now are all in there, we still are just dealing with the same 6 vertices on the big hexagon, which are only going to give you 3 of these and 3 of these. But in this, because it is composed of 2 vertices on the outer hexagon here, 1, 2, that means we'll have 2 examples of this 16 cell in each tesseract. All right. So this is how the compounding works in this. It is really a vertex to vertex compound, which is really interesting. I don't have to do more research on this. It's kind of a question I had leading up to this that I didn't get to, was, is there an edge-to-edge crossing like there is in third dimension, the compound? We already have that difference where we have the dual forms kind of sharing their center to center, this vertice to center, rather than face to center, like in the third dimension, like I was explaining previously. So, okay, there's 2 things on this slide that I want to talk about. One is kind of in the train of thought of where we're going. And that is, I'll go with that because it's still about the compounding bit of how the vertices are joining up. So this, remember, this is the 24 cell. which is the analogous to the cube octahedron, which you can kind of see over here, right? So this is analogous to the cube octahedron and the rhombic dodecahedron. And it's made up of those 24 cubes and 24 octahedra are within this. And I have it in this circle template, which is actually showing all the vertices of the 120 vertices of the 600 cell, which are all these black points. So that is indicating that if I just rotate this hexagon around to each black dot here, I'll have five of these 24 cells. And these are called disjoint 24 cells because they're individual 24 cells that don't create 24 cells between themselves. So there are more 24 cells in the 600 cell, but these are the ones that are by themselves. They call these other ones that that are made out of individual ones, distinct 24 cells, but the ones that are like unique, let's just say, they're by themselves on each of these hexagons, and everything internally would be by itself. They're called disjoint, from what I gather. So these are the 24 cell in here, and if we rotate it around the hexagon and just reproduce the same drawing on the internal inside of it, we'll connect all those lines together. We're going to come up with the vertices of the 600 cell, 120 of them. But the lines are different. So these lines here, you're not going to see in the drawing of the 600 cell. Let me just show you what that looks like again, back here. So here's my line drawing of the 600 cell. Here's the, here it is over here, line drawing of the 600 cell. So you don't see any regular hexagons lines going from this vertex here over to the one over here. There's no line there. So the points, this one is just clearly just meant to show you the individual tetrahedra, but that you can recombine lines, connect different lines to the vertex pattern here that we see, and you'll come up with different shapes, different forms, different 4D forms that are representing those third dimension forms. Now, even though they look like, this is another thing, even though these tetrahedra here are all kind of squished and elongated and all different types and size and shapes, this is the real interesting thing about the fourth dimension, is that each of these tetrahedra are regular tetrahedra in the fourth dimension, meaning they don't do this whole squish type of thing that we're looking at in this drawings that we're looking at. They're actually representative of regular triangle faces, regular tetrahedra, it's when we're trying to do the 2D depiction of it, because we really can't grasp that fourth dimension of how that all works. You should take a look at the nets on the Wikipedia page, the NETS, for what a shape, what you would fold up, and it's actually just tetrahedra or full dodecahedra that you'd have to fold up into the fourth dimension. 120 dodecahedra, full-size ones, folded up like that. But they're not squished like this. But in our depictions, we've got to look at them this way. Okay, so let me just go back and make sure that was clear, because this is all leading more, because we're going to build this out to the 120 cell in a moment to show how all these are all linked together through the vertex pattern. So there's 5 of these 24 cells distinct. Now, there's actually 10, because it's kind of like, this is a little tricky to describe, but there's 10 in there. There's 10 because in a cube, just like in a cube, you've got a star tetrahedron, it's often called, or the 2 tetrahedra that are compounded together within this. Usually I got that little compound around here, but even that's missing. So you got a compound of 2 tetrahedra in this. And in the dodecahedron, you have to, you have 5 cubes in a dodecahedron, right? So in that dodecahedron, you basically have 10 tetrahedra. But let's say you took out 5 tetrahedra from one from each of the cubes, then you would still have the vertices of the dodecahedron, right? You'd still have those 20 points to create the dodecahedron. But you only really need 5 tetrahedra. But because it's 5 cubes, in there, you have 2 in each cube, you have 10. Well, it's the same thing here. There's like a whole another one of these that is the other half, basically, of a cube, basically, let's just call it, right? It's the other tetrahedron in a cube. That's kind of what this is. It's like another half of a tetrahedron in a cube. Well, there's another one of these. So there's actually 10 of these in there, but it's easier to kind of think of it as a 5. It's a little complicated. I'm trying to still wrap my head around all that, but I hope you get some of the main points. And I hope really the images here are helping to provide a window into looking at some of these mathematical art designs that really can be looked at as a kind of mandala, but seeing that it is beautiful geometry embedding all these shapes and forms that are within it. So hopefully it gives you some eyes to be able to see that if you study and look at these forms in the way that I'm describing. Now, we can look at a shape here and you kind of see how this has got a relationship, this 24 cell, to the cube octahedron, and actually just took kind of like a snapshot of this rotating form on the Wikipedia page and kind of just grabbed it right at the right point, because I can't stop that rotation where I'd like it, but I snagged it at a good spot where you can actually see how and I kind of traced over in black pen here real quick to show where the example of that cube octahedron is. You can see it's an outer hexagon there, right? And these blue lines on here, they're the little octahedra caps that are going to be on each of the square faces kind of poking out. And those are representative of these points here, right? That one there and that one down there. So, and then you can see internally, you've got this black octahedron on the inside here. And that's what's going on in this drawing here. You've got other octahedron on the inside, because you don't just have vertices on the outside, you've got those internal connections. So yeah, really study and take a look at some of the other images and drawings. And of course, I highly recommend to draw this, if you have the skills and know how to do it. If you don't, check out the course or start at some of my other courses or an upcoming apprenticeship to get involved with this, because this is where you're really going to start to make your connection to expanding your neural pathways to relate to this material, and to have the hand-eye connection, working with the models, it's not all cerebral. There's something that comes through the relationship, through the doing of it, that is not just me talking about it. And that's the most important part of this, is to get your hands engaged with the geometry and let it start to teach you as it's taught me these things, because I didn't come from a background that had any training in this. And it just continues to reveal itself through the study as the pattern language becomes more refined. And that's what I share, is refined techniques in new geometry with the templates and the circle templates to engage in this. So check it out. Okay, the next thing is, now we're going to jump to the 120 cell. So I've slowly been working up, through the relationship of the 8 cell and 16 cell, the 24 cell, and now we have the 120 cell, and there are, 600 cell, which has 120 vertices. So the question is how are these 120 vertices depicted within the 600 vertices of the 120 cell. Now, this is different than how I did it before, where I put the vertice and showed you the dual, how it was at the center. These are going to share vertices. So, because there should be 5 disjoint, separate individual times 2. Remember, we got that same little flip-flop thing I just described with the cube and the octahedron, tetrahedra thing. We got that same relationship, but just focus on the 5 disjoint versions. We got 5 of those in this. But these 2 templates, you can't just like take this and superimpose it on and say, well, those are the vertices, they match. They don't. So this is where things get really interesting, and maybe you want to take a break, because this really stretched me to figure this out, because there was really no roadmap for this. So where are the 5 600 cells? And I'm looking for 120 vertices. I'm looking for groups of 120 vertices times 5 in this, right? And how do I find those vertices? Well, okay, this is my process of how I went about doing this. And, I had to read a lot of texts or whatever I could find, story of the 120 cell, trying to find some bit of information of how to figure this out. And I think I just found it like in some guy's explanation on a Reddit post of like giving somebody else the step-by-step method of how you would construct it on a computer or something, right? But I kind of read through all the lines and said, how can I hand draw this and figure out how to work my way backwards? And basically the description was, okay, you got these dodecahedra, you got 4 types of dodecahedra here, right? In this big 120 cell. And within each of those dodecahedra, just like I was explaining before, you've got 5 cubes representative in each, which are, branching out to around each dodecahedra. And in each dodecahedron, just like I explained before, you had the 5 cubes, and in each cube, you have 2 tetrahedra. What you have to do is focus on just one tetrahedron in each of the cubes, and those all have to be in the same orientation, meaning they always have to create a full dodecahedron. So you can't just pick any tetrahedra in there. They all got to be one that creates the compound. Basically, they have to create this. I do have this nearby because I was studying it. They have to create this to compound the 5 tetrahedra. That creates a dodecahedron, right? Compound the 5 tetrahedra. It's taken out those other 5. But if I had any one of those other tetrahedra in this, it would not make the full pattern because it's meeting up at the vertex of one that just wants to be by itself. All right, so this is what I had to do for this. I had to take out, basically focus on what, first draw up each of these little skewed versions of these cubes in each of these dodecahedra, draw in each tetrahedron. I had to figure out which tetrahedron to use because, which tetrahedron is best in this whole pattern here to place them. Because what I did know was that these tetrahedra that you see around here, they're the ones that you need to use to get the vertices, right? That's your starting point to get those 120 vertices. So I just wung it basically and was like, let me just start putting tetrahedra in here and see if one matches up and just go for something that looks good, work with symmetry, like it's that kind of clustering, and made some mistakes the first time through and like, well, I'll flip this whole group of tetrahedra and I'll use those instead. And I almost gave up a couple times, but I'm really thankful that I didn't over a few-day process because the end result was finding a way to group those tetrahedra in here. The dodecahedra are still in here, but I have various different tetrahedra that all came from these dodecahedra that are in this. And I know that's a lot to look at, but you see there's kind of a symmetrical pattern. And eventually I'll whittle this down to just kind of help it make a little more sense to give you something more refined is in this diagram here is now we're dealing with something that's starting to show the symmetry of how the blue dots are all organized. Like here's this little cluster of blue, triangle here, right? Everything started to click. Everything started to work out. I got another triangle here, 2 pointing triangles, got the ones here. It's making a regular hexagon. I got this little golden hexagon shape. I got another little triangle. These are pretty much equal. I got a hexagon in the center. And all that kind of clicked and came together. And I was like, holy smokes, it's actually working, you know? And this is what I came up with in the end. Phew, right? I mean, it like worked. But I still had to do more tests, which I'll show you. But I've never seen this drawing before, how to get the 600 cell, and maybe it's some mathematical textbook, and I'm sure Coxeter has this somewhere, but to actually show the vertices in the 600 cell. And I looked at every book and looked everywhere to try and find where the 600 cell vertices were in the arrangement of, you know, where those 120 vertices are in that arrangement of the 600 vertices. And this is the awesome symmetrical pattern that came out of it. But did it really work? You know, because now I got to reverse engineer this and basically be like, hey, did that give me the cube? Did it give me the tesseracts? Did it give me all the things that I was hoping to show that I showed you previously? Like I built up all the way up to the 120 cell there, and I had the 600 cell, but this was the missing link, is how to get the 600 cell, which will now be rotated 5 times. Like this pattern here will rotate 5 times around. There'll be 5 examples of this. And when you do that, all those vertices will just align to give you the complete pattern, right? So that was really the unique key thing of doing that. I mean, now I could just draw those dots. No one has to go through that whole process again, right? Because I mean, it's great to understand and learn that process, because then you really start to understand deeply this material. But, you know, now we can just go in and focus on the dots, and we can, you know, a little connect the dots. Like, all right, well, I have a hexagon here, and I know I can only create 2 tesseracts, you know, only going to show up like 3 of them can only be on those opposing vertices, right? So then I was like, well, there's got to be one on the inside, right? So there's this type of one here. So there's 3 of this type of tesseract and 3 of this type of tesseract. So these are the 2 examples of the 8 cell in that new dot pattern I just showed you. And there are 75, and this is now the big numbers, right, for the 120 cell, because everything is in the 120 cell. Like everything. And I have some quotes later on that I'll show you. From the 4th dimension below, it contains everything. So there are 75 disjoint 8 cells in the 120 cell, and there are 75 16 cell disjoint 16 cells in the 120 cell. Because remember, in each of these, we've got the 16 cell, we got, let's just say, call it 116 cell, 116 cell, 116 cell. And then you're now just, you know, embedding that in the 25 cell, the 24 cell, which is this one, which we talked about before. And then that's going to replicate from the 24 cell to be 25 of these in the 120 cell. Because remember, there are 5 in the 600 cell of this, and then there are going to be 5 600 cells in the 120 cell. So that's 5 times 5 is 25. So we got 25 disjoint ones. Now there are a bunch more that they call the distinct ones when you start to say, hey, I can make another one, because if I connect these 2 together, we get a whole nother one in between them. But, you know, I don't want to mess with that right now. It's doing all the connect the dots between. But so just the main raw numbers are really the 25 disjoint and the 24 cell. So here are so this example, like I thought it would be different, you know, than the one I showed you previously that I taught the drawing to the class, which was this one. And I was like, oh, wow, this is probably going to be really, really different because this one's on the main hexagon here. And when I did finally find the other version in this 120 cell, in the example of the 120 cell, it's the same one in the 600 cell. It's the same drawing in there. It's just not on the main hexagon. It's on the hexagon that is going to have representative two of them in there now, right? Because there's two of these now representing there. So we've got this one and this one. So yeah, this is remember, this is the octahedra one. This is the 24 octahedra. And at the same time, it also has the 24 cubes in there. So this is what those two drawings look like. And, I went through each of the lines to draw the octahedra and all those things to check it all out. And working with the new underlying dot pattern here was super cool to use. And the cool thing here is, remember I mentioned before about the 24 cell, that it's kind of like it is a regular fourth dimensional polytope that doesn't have a platonic solid representative, analog of it, right? Just like the 5 cell had the tetrahedron as an analog, this didn't have a platonic solid. So it's kind of like people often like to call it the 6 platonic solid in a way because it's regular. This is regular in the 4th dimension. And I said there that it was related to the shape, like the cube octahedron, which this is, like I showed in the other image, the outer hexagon with the triangle in the middle, very much like an octahedron. But this drawing over here is very much like the rhombic dodecahedron. And it's kind of a mix between the rhombic dodecahedron, which has those rhombic faces that you see all the way around. Actually, has kind of a few, it's like a rhombic dodecahedron with the red one, the blue one, kind of all nestled together there. But yeah, you can see that this is more of the cube octahedron style, and this is more of the rhombic dodecahedron kind of view of it. So when you do all this whole thing here, you get a new colored dot pattern to break down those 24 cells that I just showed into this 600 cell that's found in the 120 cell. I know it's complicated, but just remember that this whole dot pattern is going to be found 5 times in the 120 cell because this is only 120 vertices. And it's not the 120 that is the 3 radial rings, 4 built on the 30-point pattern. This is the one that is in the 120 cell. So 120 points times 5 will give you the full amount. But I wanted to show the 24 cell where each of those 5 disjoint 24 cells are in the dot pattern with the black, white, and then green and gold and blue and white pattern there, right? So you could see the outer hexagon is going to mirror the inner hexagon, mirrors the outer hexagon, and just a different distribution of the color template pattern as we go around to show each of the dot pattern of the 24 cells. So this is all stuff I don't know if it exists anywhere else to look at it this way, but super cool to get there through the process I went through and share these images. So I hope you're enjoying them. Okay, this is the 600 cell. And what I did was earlier I showed you this individual pattern of each of the tetrahedra kind of hanging out by itself to kind of get the main vertices. And knowing me, I had to just see what would happen if I went around and did each of those tetrahedra in every single rotation all the way around to come up with the complete line drawing of those 120 tetrahedra that came from each of those dodecahedra. Remember, each of these came from 5 in this one, 5 in that one, and 5 in that one, rotated around. We got the 120. And I just had to see what it would look like. And this is that drawing. And of course, you could see that each of the tetrahedra are going to focus on the new dot pattern that I came up with that little hexagon in the middle and the big hexagon on the outside, and a lot of lines in between each dot. But each of those are representing tetrahedron. Now, the interesting thing about this, and definitely, I already told myself I'm not going to bother drawing this. You just got to have to visualize it. But that's only 120 tetrahedra, right? Well, it's called a 600 cell because it's got 600 tetrahedra. Well, I only got to this point through 120 tetrahedra, but those were the only tetrahedra you needed to get the vertices. So I'm good with that, right? To create the other 480 other tetrahedral cells, well, now you just have to use the vertices that you got in relationship to some of the triangles that are created, with the tetrahedra that you already have, and just come up with new tetrahedra and fill in the spaces between. And, that's, I don't think it's worth to do the drawing like that at that point. It's just going to be a whole cluster of lines that will be indecipherable, probably. But if anybody wants to do it, ask me. I'll give you the drawing, and you could do it and try and figure that out. I like to try and figure out a few just to see some of them how they work, but I think it's a lot to get another 600 in there because the symmetry is a little different than working with the 30-point pattern. So I think it'd just be a little bit more challenging, but there's a drawing there to be had. Okay, so notice I haven't talked about the 5-cell too much in this. Well, because the 5-cell, which was the very first that I showed you in this whole sequence, it's the simplest of the fourth dimensional polytopes, the 4D forms. It's the simplest of them because it just has the 5 vertices, and it's analogous to that tetrahedron, which is the simplest of the platonic solids with 4 vertices and the 4 faces and the 6 edges. And the 5-cell hasn't been mentioned much because it's not represented in any of the vertex to vertex connection in those other polytopes that I showed you in the other one. So it's not in the cube, it's not in the 8-cell, it's not in the 16-cell, it's not in the 24-cell, it's not in the 600-cell, even though it has 600 tetrahedra in it, and this thing is 5 cells made of tetrahedra. It's not in there, right? The only place it shows up is in the 120 cell. So this is kind of like the final one that shows that the 120 cell contains all the 4-dimensional polytopes that were below it, and all its vertices, the 600 of them, contain the connection point to recreate all the other 4th dimensional polytopes. And the 3rd dimension, the 2nd dimension, the 1st dimension, which some of the quotes will show you in a sec. So where are these 5 cells? Well, I thought it would be a lot more challenging, and I'm pretty sure this is how it is, because you have these pentagons, right? And this is representing this pentagon and the crossing lines to create these equilateral triangles. You've got pentagons all the way around. And, we add in the other lines, just like we do, like the vertices are provided, like in the other drawings, the vertices are there. But you always have to draw on the additional lines because these lines just show you dodecahedra. They don't show you 5 cells. So we drew in the blue lines here to go ahead and show where each of those will be created, because these pentagons are all the way throughout. You could see on this rosette or ring, you have 30. On this one, you got 30. On this one, you got 30. And on the center over here, you have another 30. So, of course, you add that up and you get 120 stars like this with pentagon shape and you have 120 in the 5-cell, all recreating the individual vertex for each of them is within this. So each of those are distinct pentagons, or I'd say disjoint, because distinct means something else for them in the language. So these are disjoint pentagon, disjoint 5 cells. They're all individual. They don't share any vertex with one another. I don't know how you'd make them that many 5 cells in there without focusing on that template pattern like that. Okay, so we're kind of getting a little close to the end. Just a few more slides. I hope you're still with me and that you enjoy the video, because I know it's my first one in a while. And this is a lot of information. And, we're kind of culminating here with the 120 cell. For the most part, I have a few other things to add to this. And these are the quotes from the Wikipedia page, just to kind of I can't remember all this stuff off the top of my head usually. So I just want to wrote down some of the notes here, which are basically all saying the same thing. It's like it contains one of everything, right? So, the 120 cell is a compound of all 5 of the other regular convex polytopes. So, when I read that a while ago, probably I didn't know how, right? And hopefully through my illustrations today, and beauty of the sacred geometry techniques and how new geometry has made that accessible to me is showing you all those other 5 convex polytopes. Remember, in the 120, you got the 5 cells, you got the 8 cells, the 16 cells, the 24 cells, the 600 cells. That's everything we just did in this dot pattern, which is just what I showed you in the previous slides. So beyond the 4th dimension, though, we go all the way back to the first, which are chords. There's, first dimension chords, 2nd dimension polygon shapes, the 3rd dimension, the platonic solids, and with the 4th dimension polytopes, which I was mostly talking about here, occur in the 120 cell, all the relationships among them. It's a 4-dimensional jigsaw puzzle in which all those polytopes are the parts. 120 cell is the unique solution to the combination of all these parts. It's like the big culminating everything in there. It's so cool. The 120 cell incorporates the geometries of every convex regular polytope in the first 4 dimension, except the polygons 7 and above. Now, so, it's all the way up to 6. So, we got the triangles and squares, the hexagons, pentagons. I'm surprised it doesn't have the decagon in there. I think it probably should include the decagon, and maybe they just went 7, excluding 7 and above. I'm betting it has decagons in there because a lot of the other polytopes, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't have decagons. Yeah, it probably doesn't, because it probably doesn't have the icosidodeca. So yeah, probably is just the first up to 6. The 120 cell is a 4-dimensional Swiss Army knife, contains one of everything. The 120 cell contains examples of every relationship among the convex. I think I already have that one. So anyway, I just pulled a couple of those just to kind of reiterate in other people's words. These are quotes from various different studiers of this amazing form. And, it's really a great study to get into, and one heck of a drawing to do, that's for sure. It's, like I said, 8-hour drawing for me, and but it was the first time I ever did it. And I'll show you what it looks like in hand in just a moment after the video. Okay, that's really the main meat of the whole presentation. There was one other thing that I thought was worth, a couple other things worth mentioning in here that I'm just going to touch on a little bit, because it's still a little more detailed information. And in some of my videos, I like to talk about, cross sections of the inner plane of a form. Like if you, cut the form in half and where the vertices are going to show up around that, like what type of great circle will go around the form and how do the vertices align along that circle. So this is some images from the Wikipedia site that are showing the 120 cell. This one is showing those chords that I mentioned that have some unique characteristics to them that I'm not going to go into detail. You could read all that information on there. But here are some of the main polygons, and guess these are it. But they do include a decagon on here, so I wonder if there's a decagon on there. So when that quote said more 7 and above are excluded, I would think the decagon's in there, because at least there's a Petri polygon. Yeah, it's probably a Petri polygon is picture 2 pentagons, one on top of the other, and then zigzag it across around. Maybe that's what that decagon is there. So I'm not sure about that. But anyway, you got your hexagon, you got your pentagon, you do have a decagon, you got your square. And then there's this very important irregular great hexagon. And these short little edge lengths that are created here, well, those short little edge lengths are the actual edge length of each edge of the 120 cell. So if you started with a 2-inch radius for your compass and you did this drawing like I did over here, and I came up with this little construction because I wanted to draw this cool little hexagon here, great circle hexagon, irregular one. So I did this little construction, came up with it, and there's the little edge length out there, 0.27. And that's the edge length of the form, creating this irregular hexagon. And then all of a sudden, it kind of clicked for me. And this is the really interesting thing about this hexagon. When I saw both of them together, I said, hey, I wonder about the length of this line. This is really hitting my sacred geometry blueprint in my mind's eye for really dialing in this shape of this little outer edge. It's been a real interesting conversation about it for a long time, people trying to find out what that line is, right? Well, I said, let me not, after I did this little interesting construction here, thinking I was drawing something that I'd never seen before, basically, when I've drawn it thousands of times, I've drawn this thousands of times. And it's right here in the golden seed of life, and you can draw it in a lot of different ways. But this little hexagon, same proportions as the one in their diagram, is actually the proportion of the dodecahedron. That's the golden ratio proportion version of the dodecahedron in its 2D example, right? It's projection of it in the second dimension, the dodecahedron that has the proper golden ratio edge lengths. If you have ever seen any of my Metatron's Cube videos that describe how it's inaccurate, the Metatron's Cube depiction, as you can see here, which I'm calling broken, because it's breaking off any access to the fourth dimension. Because basically that polygon that's showing up here is portion of, it's these short little edge lengths right here in this dodecahedron that is now all of a sudden, which I thought was just, 2D part of the drawing, which is now actually in the fourth dimension. It's an inner slice of a great circle in a fourth dimensional object that is giving you the edge length. It's giving you the actual edge length of the 120 cell, which is the kind of ultimate expression of the dodecahedron in the fourth dimension. In the third dimension, it's really weird. In the third dimension, it's just a 2D edge here that's representing an edge, but the true edge length would be this one back here. So it's kind of like the second dimension drawing all of a sudden jumped to the fourth dimension to become an actual plane in the form. Like this is not a true plane in the form here, in this form, in the 3D form. But in the fourth dimension it is, but in the 2-dimension drawing, it's the dodecahedron. I don't know if you're following me, but it's really interesting that it does show up. And And this is why I've stressed in other videos. I don't like using the word stress too much, but I've stated in other videos, because I don't see any of this work as stressful. I love it. Uh, it's why I've stated so much in the other videos is that why it's so important to make the Metatron's cube depiction, correction to this is because it's going to cut off the geometry of relating to higher dimensional structures. And I've done that out the wazoo in the third dimension, and showed so many examples of how the stellations and so many things on it to then actually now show that in the fourth dimension, that this little polygon, this missing line, as Giancarlo Melchizedek called it as he was hunting for this depiction here, which he shared with us, he's trying to figure this out. And I can understand it's hard to figure out, but really all it is just looking at the edge of a hexagon and dividing it into the golden proportion with the short little section in the middle and the longer edges on either side. And that's any hexagon that's created like that will create this irregular hexagon shape, which is in the fourth dimension of the 120 cell. And you could see that these pentagons are just really way off, right? Because remember, this outline here is the outline of the truncated octahedron. And that's what that was from the Flower of Life design, truncated octahedron outer thing. We needed to add the golden ratio proportions within it to get this golden ratio drawing of it. And there's a lot of ways that I've shown how to do that. So many different methods. And one of my, one way that I like the most is this golden seed of life method that I call it, with the golden ratio circles within the seed of life circles, which easily divide everything and clearly show you what the template's based on. Okay, one last thing here for this, and I don't want to get into this too much either, but for future research is really trying to look into this E8 a little more. I'm not really sure how it relates to the fourth dimensional forms I just showed you, but I did come across somewhere that on a site, I think it was kind of relating like maybe Kabbalah or something to the E8 or something like that. I forget the name of the site, but it mentions E8 in there, and it just shows some good examples that I wanted to test out and make sure was accurate. Was that the two sets of 600 cell vertices, because this E8 structure, which is in some theories of everything and has been used to look at theories of everything, is basically 240 vertices, and the 240 vertices are separated into two different sets of 600 cells. And I figured out that the 600 cells, the relationship between the larger one to the one that's interior to it, is two golden circles, right? Large golden circles. So basically, this big E8 structure is basically in one set of circles, one set of 120 vertices start on this circle, and the second one, you basically draw another 600 cell on this circle. And if you do that, you'll take that 600 cell and arrange it in this, at least the vertices will be proportionally correct. And that came from this template here, which is cool to have the vertices in the right spot. I think it'd be another trick to draw on every single one of these lines. And then discovering what all the lines mean and what shapes are embedded in there. Because I haven't really seen any reference to how the shapes or forms are broken down from this, because this is a higher dimension than the fourth dimension that I was just sharing with you. So as you can see, it keeps going and expanding as the relationships between the geometries are going across scale from the points of the 0 dimension to the lines, second dimension polygons, third dimension forms, fourth dimension, and then fifth dimension. Well, really the interesting thing is from the fifth on is really you're dealing with the tesseract, the tesseracts and orthoplexes and simplexes and things like that. from that point on. So really, fourth dimension is really ripe with a lot of geometric discovery. So anyway, that was a long-winded video. I'm sure I went well over an hour on this one, and I hope you really enjoyed it. It's my first one in quite a while, and so I may be a little rusty in my flow there, but I really enjoyed having a chance to compile this video and sharing it with you. And I just wanted to show the full drawing of that in hand of the 120 cell, which I did on the 24 by 18 larger paper to have enough space to draw everything in there. And of course, all my pentagons are probably not perfect, but I'm super pleased to be able to do that. And remember that other course, if you want to start getting this, they have the apprenticeship starting on June 16th. If you're watching this video in 2025, yeah, check it out. I think if you want to get started with me on this, I'm very accessible to join in with. I have a small group of apprentices that I've been working with for quite a while now, who joined me through a whole series of Archimedean solids classes, and then into the dimension class for the master class since last September. And this is my first regular apprenticeship in a while. So you can join in on that. You can check out the video to learn how to draw the majority of things I just showed you. And I'll probably do an additional fourth dimension masterclass on other things that relate to this, and may even do a intensive session on drawing the 120 cell. I just gauge it by my interest in my students, the apprentices that are interested in learning this, and what's hot and what people want to learn. And we'll have the Catalan solids class that I'll probably be teaching those. Archimedean solids are done, two complete sessions, 18 sessions that I was broken over. That's on new geometry courses, other introductory courses. So there's quite a library there to get engaged. But I find most people enjoy joining the live sessions to just working one-on-one, because you'll really probably do it and get engaged with it. And once you start to make connections between these patterns, it's really going to enrich other areas of your life in terms of your pattern recognition skills, and seeing deeply into structure and whatever else is meant for it to teach you, So yeah, thanks for joining me. It was super fun to share the material with you, and hopefully I'll do another video down here in the future. I'm not sure when that will come to be. I'm kind of leaving it open to whatever kind of guides me to do it at the right time. And it seems like within the past week and a half, this material just bubbled up just like that at the end of our 9th session for the class. And I was like, all right, it's time to do a video on all this. So much love and appreciation, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.